Today we're doing an oil change of a 1950 Series 62 Cadillac. Before I do any oil change, the first thing that I do is check the oil level. This will give us a good indication of the health of the motor. So to check the oil, you pull your dipstick out and you wipe it clean. Then you reinsert your dipstick. Put it all the way back in and pull it out one more time. Then you quickly look at it to make sure that it's within the desired markings on the oil dipstick. So as we can see on this dipstick here, we are just underneath the full sign, which is pretty much exactly what you want to see. Alright, so now I'm going to loosen the drain bolt. Now that the vehicle is on the lift, we can go ahead and take a quick look and see what we've got going on. This is the first time that this vehicle has been serviced since it was rebuilt. Actually, I would call it restoration, and it was done beautifully. And you can tell that this is the first service because there's still a good coat of paint on that oil drain pan bolt since this whole block was repainted. There's a couple of things that are leaking. We're just going to go ahead and re-torque up the transpan gasket after this and wipe away all the other oils that we see so that we can actually properly pinpoint this leak. So let's get the drain and I'll show you my trick. Alright, so my little trick that I do is pretty simple. All I do is I use a rag that's getting ready to go into the dumpster. I make sure that there's nothing that looks like there's metal in it because that's what we're going to be looking for in the oil afterwards. So we'll drain the oil into this rag, which becomes our filter, and afterwards we'll check it for anything that looks shiny and metallic. That came off really nicely. Now I'm gonna raise this guy up. Hope you can still see. And start draining. And as it drains, I'm also going to shine a light just to check how we're doing. So now what I'm doing is I'm holding the rag and I'm letting the oil drain out through it. So it's acting as our filter. And after this all drains out, I'm going to lay it down flat and take a look with the flashlight to see what we have going on. And this oil is definitely in need of changing. So we still have a little bit of that thicker engine oil sludge combination coming out of this oil pan. And what we're going to do is we're going to do an increased service oil change interval. So we'll probably change this oil again after just 30 miles or so of driving to get the rest of this thicker weight oil out. What we don't know is what engine oil was used prior to this service change. So it could be one of those standard old school 30 weight oils, which breaks down a lot faster than our newer engine oils. So we are going to use a synthetic racing oil from Valvoline that has a high zinc content, which is really good for these old engines. Alright, so now we're looking at our rag filter here. We've got all the oil out of the motor, and you can see a little bit of sludge build up here. That's why it's not seeping through this. It's a little bit thicker than the oil is. And we don't see any metal material, which is good. So we probably have a pretty decent internal lubrication system going on, and we don't have anything eating itself away. So we're just going to make sure that we change the oil more frequently on this car, and that should solve our slight sludge problem. So I'm one of those guys that's really scared to put detergent oils inside any vehicle that has any sign of sludge, especially an older vehicle like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill and drain the oil one time and see how that works. So I'm going to fill up the oil, start the car up, let it get up to operating temperature, shut it down, drain the oil, and see if there's any more sludge or varnish that comes out with it. Then what I'll do is just increase the oil change intervals until we no longer have any evidence of sludge. If the sludge was any more worse in the buildup that I saw when we did this oil change, I would drop the pan, remove the valve covers, and remove physically any of the sludge that I see by hand. But since it wasn't that bad, we're just going to go ahead and try this method instead. Alright guys, I had just finished letting the car idle, got up to temperature, and I changed the engine oil. I let it cool cool off a little bit. I had to do some other projects around here. And now I'm going to drain the oil again and see how we're looking. Ooh, it's going to be hot. It's warm. Okay, all right. So we're looking a lot better. There's still some signs of intermix, but nothing nearly as hateful as when we had changed it or drained it the first time. So I'm feeling a lot better about this, and I'm going to go ahead and change the filter and change the engine oil, and this thing should be ready to rock and roll. Something that I find really cool about this car is that it uses a canister style oil filter, something that you would see on your newer 2011 and up Toyota pickup trucks. And what I really like about them is they're pretty easy to change. A lot of people are complaining that the new canister filters are requiring an extra step instead of those standard spin-off or spin-on kind, but I think it's pretty unique to see one of these on a vehicle that's over 60 years old. So to take it off, all we do is remove this top nut, which holds it on. And once you break it loose, it's pretty easy to take off. All right, so we've almost got this guy out. All right, so doing this, you're going to want to have a bunch of rags around because you don't want to get oil all over your paint. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my rag now. All right, rag in hand, pull this little guy off, take it to the side. And your new filter should come with a gasket that goes just underneath here. So that'll get replaced pretty easily too. And then we'll take a little spring off. And then we should feel around and we'll find a little clip to pull our canister out. I'm going to move this gasket out of the way and then grab my filter and just slip it out. All right. So now I'm going to grab my rag and pull this thing out of frame quickly so I don't spill it anywhere. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say that we did a pretty good job doing our little oil flush here, because the oil that's in here that's residual doesn't feel like there's much sludge in it. And there's some pretty good fresh oil in here too. So I'm just kind of feeling around to make sure that everything's looking good, that there's no real breakdown or particulate filters from that or anything real heavy and dense that would require, to really clean this thing out. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. So putting the new filter in is just as easy as taking the old one out. All you have to do is take your filter and put it into position and put it down all the way till it latches. Well, it doesn't really latch, you just press it all the way down so you can't anymore. And the whole point of that spring that we had right here is to keep this filter down all the way at the bottom. Because what happens is oil gets pumped in from the bottom of this canister, and as it starts to fill up, it then comes out and goes outside of this fill hole here. Of this drain hole here, and from that drain hole, it goes right back to where you filled this engine up with oil in the first place. Pretty cool setup. Now I'm just going to take my new gasket and put it in place. And just make sure that it sits pretty nice and flush. And then I'm going to go ahead and install it. So, there we go. So I'm pretty happy with how that's sitting. All right. There we go. That's the sensation I wanted to feel. So we've got our spring in there, And we've got our gasket, which is nicely seated now. And we'll go ahead and tighten this sucker up. So there's also going to be an O-ring here and a gasket here, and this gasket's in really good shape, so there's no need for us to replace it. Alrighty, so now we're getting in there. Go ahead and snug this guy back up. You don't need to over tighten it, just good and snug. I'm sure that's a great reference for something that you're watching in a video, good and snug. It's like, how does this engine smell? Quite good. Okay, so now we're going to top off the engine, check the oil level, start it up, and check for engine oil leak. So now we've got our engine running, and it is purring like a kitten. It sounds really wonderful. We have no oil leaks or fuel leaks, so everything is how we want to see it. We're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up and let her take a ride on the road.